Now, tonight I can tell you that lawyer is off Trump's team, and his conversations about potential pardons, that's what's leaking tonight. I'm joined by former federal prosecutors Seth Waxman and Renato Mariotti, as well as Joyce Vance. That's three former federal prosecutors, and Margaret Love, who was the former DOJ pardon attorney under George H.W. Bush in the Clinton administration. She specializes in executive clemency cases and presidential pardons, so we are indebted to what looks like an all-star panel. I mean, this would shock any law school, quite frankly. Renato, first and foremost, what does it tell you that John Dowd was reportedly talking pardons before people flipped?
Well, it suggests to me that he was trying to dissuade them from flipping, and I think they did it in a clever way. They had Dowd be the one to communicate with them so that this way Trump's fingerprints aren't on it. I mean, you played the tapes just a minute ago, Ari, and you saw how Trump himself was very tight-lipped about it. This way the words are coming out of Dowd's mouth, not his. It's going to be harder for Mueller now to peer behind the curtain and see if Trump himself was the one behind the efforts to dissuade those witnesses from flipping.
Joyce, what do you see here?
You know, I agree with Renato to a certain extent, but I'm really troubled by the fact that it's John Dowd's, the president's personal lawyer, who's involved in dangling these pardons.
Lawyer, yeah, go ahead.
Right, the criminal lawyer. Typically, and Margaret, I know, will confirm this. For instance, as a U.S. attorney, I handled a number of situations where a defendant sought a pardon. Those were initiated inside of the Justice Department. The pardon attorney's office evaluated those, often in consultation with my U.S. Attorney's Office for an opinion. Ultimately, it would go over to the White House counsel, who would personally then discuss the pardon with the president. Nowhere in that scenario is there room for an attorney privately hired by the president to represent him in connection with criminal charges. And so what Dowd's engagement looks to me like...
you ticked off so much, I want to be clear. You're saying he was out of his lane in a way that might have been inappropriate?
He wasn't just out of his lane. What he was doing was he was a criminal attorney trying to obtain or trying to prevent witnesses against his client from being available to testify at trial. You know, if you get a witness job out of the country so that they can't be subpoenaed to trial as a criminal defense attorney, that's not something that it's kosher to do, and the government will take action against you for that. Here, this is essentially what Dowd was trying to do. He was trying to make witnesses against his, presumably against his clients, unavailable at trial.
So, Margaret, if you take the New York Times report on its face, is this how the pardon power is supposed to be considered and exercised or not?
Well, I would say that there is an ordinary kind of pardon procedure, as Joyce has mentioned. But that doesn't mean that that's the only kind of pardon that is possible or indeed proper. And some cases do go through the Justice Department, and some cases are handled by the president directly. So there are a lot of different ways that the president can get advice about pardoning. Meaning
you're okay with this on its face, or it's problematic on its face? I couldn't quite follow where you come down.
Oh, well, I wasn't commenting on the present situation and on...
I know, but I'm going to go ahead and lawyer you here. We got so many lawyers. I'm going to lawyer you and say my question is, if you treat the New York Times story on its face, does it seem like a problematic approach to pardons, or does it seem okay?
Well, I think it seems to me a bit problematic, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Seth?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a question to me. This has been the X factor in this whole scenario with Paul Manafort especially. Why hasn't he flipped? I mean, the case against him seems to be fairly strong. I mean, a money laundering case, having prosecuted a lot of those, you know, they have a money trail there. There are bank records, there are emails, there are text messages, and then you have Rick Gates flipping, a person who can breathe life into those documents and has known Paul Manafort for the better part of 10 years or more. In the face of all that evidence, and we see all the others flipping and dropping, why is Paul Manafort standing tall? And it's always been my kind of supposition that it may be because in words or substance, President Trump has communicated to Mr. Manafort that I'll take care of you.
So you think this is all about the potential to avoid Manafort flipping?
I mean, it sure could be that way. I mean, if you're President Trump and you knew Paul Manafort was in that key Trump Tower meeting with your son and son-in-law, and if that was a quid pro quo where the Russians were offering dirt on Hillary Clinton in exchange for some kind of benefits, and you're worried about that, and you want to make sure Manafort doesn't get into the Mueller camp, I guess one way of doing that is to offer a pardon.
Right, which is what makes it such an explosive potential situation for them in rattling the White House. Now, Joyce, people are probably wondering what's the silver lining in here for Donald Trump, right? Well, I have one. I have one. I'll read to you for your analysis.
Okay.
The New York Times story, I just want to be fair to the White House, says, well, it's unclear whether Dowd, who resigned last week, discussed the pardons with Mr. Trump before bringing them up with the other lawyers. And Joyce, this goes to a defense we've seen in the Stormy Daniels case, in the case of silencing women, and now we're seeing the same implied defense here tonight, which is Donald Trump must have the most rogue lawyers in the world. They're paying people without checking with him. They're facilitating payments out of their own pocket, their home equity line. Now they're thinking about exercising the constitutional pardon power without talking to him. I mean, for a guy who's pretty hands-on and ran a lean operation at Trump Org, he seems to have a lot of people doing whatever they feel like.
Yeah, you seem to have answered the question brilliantly. It's not much of a defense. And the closer folks, you know, for instance, Dowd may find himself in the uncomfortable position of being interrogated by Mueller and under some criminal suspicion. Whether he would decide to flip and turn on Trump and whether he could do so without violating the attorney-client privilege is, of course, open to question. But at the end of the day, there will be a variety of different ways of proving whether the president was part of these conversations. We've seen some indication that he was researching early on the extent of his pardon power. How that matches up on the timeline to where these conversations happened will be interesting. Don't see a whole lot of silver lining in this conversation for the White House. It's damaging.
Right, more of a touch of gray. Renato, let me read more from the report about the alleged Dowd view, because, again, this is a significant report when you're talking about people who know things about Donald Trump, who flipped to cooperate with Mueller, and a way to potentially evade that. It says Dowd privately said he didn't know why Flynn had accepted a plea. He said he told the lawyer for Michael Flynn the president had long believed, note the reference to the president, had long believed the case against Flynn was flimsy and was prepared to pardon him. Can you parse that pardon reference to the president, a triple P, Renato?
Well, I will tell you, I was just as surprised as Dowd when Flynn flipped, because I assumed, you know, we know that Comey was asked by Trump to let Flynn go, so we know that Trump felt strongly about Flynn. But I'll tell you what that really means is that Flynn was probably concerned about his son being prosecuted, or concerned about state charges, or there was some other reason why Flynn flipped, and we won't know now. We don't know now, but eventually, I'm sure we will learn what that is.
And Margaret, again, you're here joining us because of your extensive experience in a nonpartisan capacity dealing with these complex pardon and clemency issues. So you know as well as I do how often tweets are a core part of that process. JK, they usually aren't, but look at what Flynn's son tweeted in the middle of all this. Flynn's brother, about time you pardon General Flynn, who's taken the biggest fall for all of you given the illegitimacy of this confessed crime in the wake of corruption. That's a family member. What do you make of what we can glean from that, which is that for some reason we have this new report from the New York Times, but we also have what lawyers would call a contemporaneous account in history that suggests people around Flynn were talking about pardons. This was somehow in the water.
Let me make one comment to add to this.
Sure.
The question of whether the president's pardon power is unlimited has two aspects. One is it unlimited in terms of what it can do for people? And the other one is it unlimited in terms of the consequences for the president himself? And I think in the first instance, yes, the pardon power is unlimited, but that does not mean that there may not be consequences if the president gets involved in some sort of improper behavior when he's pardoning. So I think that I would simply add to what Joyce mentioned about the limits of the president's pardon power.
Yeah, you're saying something really, really important and potentially bad for a White House, any White House that would misuse the pardon power, which is the fact that its execution is unlimited doesn't mean there are consequences. The power to appoint a senator by a sitting governor is fairly standard and unlimited in our Constitution and state rules, and yet when Governor Blagojevich tried to auction off that appointment, he wound up in federal prison. It doesn't mean governors can't appoint, it just means other stuff, as we say in court, other stuff can happen. Margaret, love your expertise as a first-time member of our guests on the beat. We appreciate Renato, Joyce, and Seth. Thank you all.